In this video, we'll take a closer look at one of the startups that we've invested in as part of StashAway's angel investing program. The startup is called iPiD. First, I'll speak to the co-founder and CEO, Damien Dugauquier, and then I'll speak to one of the XA members that have invested in the company. His name is Kimin Yam, who's going to share with us some of his insights as an investor. iPiD is a global pay now equivalent. It makes cross-border payments easy by utilizing an email address or another unique proxy instead of a bank account number to identify a specific payment flow. iPiD is headquartered in Singapore and operates globally. Damien has more than a decade of experience working on global payments, spending most of his time at Swift, most recently as the APAC head of data and analytics solution. He co-founded iPiD with two people coming from a very deep similar background in payments, Etienne Van Bokov and Eddie Haddad. Damien, thank you so much for finding the time to speak to me today. Okay, Damien, so iPiD is making global payments simple, secure, seamless. What does that mean?
So iPiD stands for International Payments Identity. And our vision, our mission at iPiD is to make international payment, cross-border payments as easy, as simple, as secure and as seamless as domestic payments. In short, that's essentially what we do.
Okay, so I understand the problem you're trying to solve. How are you trying to solve it?
First of all, let me say what we don't do. We don't move money. We're not another payment company that tries to make payment faster and cheaper. That's not what we do. We focus on those overlay services, the value-added services, and we basically interconnect them on a global basis. How do we do that? We do that through essentially two APIs. One that is a validate API, so it's a bank account validation API, and the second one that we call a fetch API, it's an API to do the proxy resolution, so essentially to call our API with a mobile number and we respond with the banking details. And the way that those APIs work is that we have a platform with two sides. On the one side, we have data providers, so these are partners that we work with so that they can respond to our API calls. So we call our partner with banking details, they can say, yes, the banking details are correct, or no, they're not correct, or it looks like it's correct, but maybe the name is not a perfect match. So on the one side, the supply side, the data partners. The other side are the data consumers, so institutions. We don't work directly with individuals. We provide our service to banks, fintechs, corporates. They call our API to validate or fetch banking details globally. So that's how we do that.
So if I'm a bank, a fintech, or a corporation, and I want to improve the way I manage cross-border payment flows, I should get in touch with you.
Exactly. So if you are involved in cross-border payment and you want to improve your customer experience, you want to reduce failed payments, and you want to reduce fraud risks, indeed you should be calling us, yes.
Sounds good. So is what the Singapore government has done with Pay Now, where you can send money to somebody by simply typing their phone number, your vision simply on a global scale? So you want to make it possible to send money by typing a number to anybody locally, or are there differences?
Exactly, and more, I would say, and that's essentially what we want to enable. So when we looked at iPiD at the payment space, we felt that actually 90% of the innovation has already happened. So the pieces of the puzzle exist in terms of what constitutes a good payment experience. So as a customer, what is a good payment experience? We believe that all the innovation has already been invented somewhere in the world. So it's all about adoption, now creating more adoption and making sure that all those solutions are being rolled out everywhere and available to everyone everywhere. So what makes a good experience? Essentially there are two things, two components for a good payment experience. Number one, the money, the payment must move fast and cheap from my account to your account, for instance. First problem to solve.
Yeah.
And that must happen domestically and cross-border. And that problem has been solved domestically in most markets with the new generation of instant payment systems, and cross-border it is being solved by a lot of existing players and new actors that are really focusing on that problem, moving money faster and cheaper. That's the first component. The second component of what makes a good payment experience is everything that comes on top of fast and cheap payment. So it's all the value-added services, what we also call overlay services on a payment system. In Singapore, for instance, what we all know as Pay Now is an example of an overlay service. So it's essentially a service that enables the banks to call a central database with a mobile number and to receive, in exchange, the banking details of that customer.
And then the result in user experience is seamless and easy. Okay, so let's take a step back. Where did the idea of iPiD came from?
For me, my entrepreneur journey is maybe a bit different from others, meaning that it didn't start from an idea. It started from me as I would say an individual wanting to be an entrepreneur and wanted to move out from my corporate life. And I sort of followed a sequential approach. I said, okay, I want to be an entrepreneur because I've always wanted to be an entrepreneur. Step 2 is I don't want to do it alone. I need to have a team with me. So then I brought together my co-founders, essentially, people with a lot of experience in the payment space, cross-border payment space, as well as people with an entrepreneurial experience. Then with the team, we actually started to brainstorm. So what are the gaps still in the payment space? And that's where we have identified this idea. So in these two components that make a good payment system, so one, moving money fast and cheap, the second one, value-added services. One value-added service that we all know is Pay Now, so this ability to pay based on a mobile number. But that's not the only one. Actually, there are 4 overlay services that have really transformed our experience as customers. So one is this one, proxy addressing or paying to a mobile number. Second is bank account validation. So simply being able to, when you put an account number, so you still pay to an account number, especially B2B payments are still paying based on account numbers. But then having this ability to confirm, to verify that the account number is correct, the account is open, and the account actually belongs to the person that you want to pay. So that's another overlay service, value-added service that exists in many markets. It is there also growing in adoption. It is still missing in countries like Singapore. That's probably something that we should think about as a Singapore payment system. And so that's a second example of overlay service. A third one is QR payments. And a last one is request to pay. And so these 4 overlay services that are not about moving money, but moving data, the problem is that they've transformed the domestic payment experience. But as soon as you go cross-border, you don't enjoy it anymore.
Yeah, it becomes costly, it becomes expensive, it becomes complex. And actually, you mentioned the ability to control that the payments go to the right account. So I'm assuming there is both an issue of fraud and an issue of simply making a mistake. Is that the way you think about it?
Absolutely. So one example on the paying to a mobile number is, so here in Singapore, I'm receiving payments based on mobile number every day. But if my mom in Belgium wants to send me money for my birthday, she cannot just put my Singapore mobile number in her banking app in Belgium to send the payment. So that's the first problem that we want to solve, is to enable that same experience for my mom when she's in Belgium and she uses her whatever app and she wants to pay me in Singapore. So first problem to solve, and that's really about indeed customer experience, making sure for her, giving her the confidence that she's paying the right account, so preventing failed payments and so forth. So first problem to solve. Second big problem to solve is indeed around account validation, like you've mentioned. I was talking to someone actually last week who moved from Indonesia to Singapore. In Indonesia, there is an account validation solution, meaning that when you go on your bank app, you put an account number and then it will show you the name of the recipient, which is great in terms of confidence. So you know that you're paying the right person. You know that you're not victim of fraud. If you pay an invoice, you're sure that you will actually pay your supplier and not someone else because the invoice has been intercepted and someone has changed the account.
I've always had that worry when I type the account number, or in the European, the long IBAN, and I'm like, am I missing a 0, a 7 here, a 6 there? I'm sending the money to somebody else. So I know that feeling.
And so there are really 2 things here. One is a mistake, right?
Yes.
An IBAN is such a long string of characters, you might make a mistake and then the money might go somewhere else. Because you might not know, and most people don't know, domestic payments are purely credited based on the account number. What I mean with that is there is no name check. So if you want to pay John Doe, but by mistake you put the IBAN of Caroline, the payment will go to Caroline, even though the bank will receive a payment instruction with the name of John Doe. So there is no name check. In domestic environments, there is no name check, so payments can actually go to the wrong account. And that might just be a mistake, but there is also fraud, and fraud is increasing, which is why in Europe there is a pre-regulation that aims to mandate that account validation to protect customers. So to avoid that indeed someone intercepts an invoice, just changes the account number, still leaves the right name of the supplier, but then again the payment goes to the wrong destination.
So you obviously know a lot about payments. So where does your experience and your colleagues' experience come from?
So indeed, we spent probably collectively as a founding team around a century, so around 100 years in cross-border payments and mostly at Swift, Thomson Reuters as well. And that's where actually we gained a pretty good understanding of how payments work and sort of what are the missing links in the payment space. So myself, around 15 years at Swift, a couple of years in Europe, covering Europe, Middle East and Africa. Then I moved around 10 years ago to Singapore and I've covered the region here. I was always more on the data side. So I have a decent knowledge about the data requirements to make payments work. The other co-founders, so we have one of our co-founder, Geert-Jan van Bokov, who spent a couple of years at Swift, but then also became an entrepreneur. So he's bringing that experience of building and running and growing a company based in the Netherlands. So we're a very global team, which is important for what we are building. So Geert-Jan is one of the co-founders. We have as well Eddie Haddad. Eddie spent many years in the cross-border payment space at Swift, and then prior to that, he was the managing director for Thomson Reuters in APAC, so also experience in the FX space. And lastly, so Alain Ras, who's our founding partner, joined us very early on, and so he used to run basically business development globally for Swift, more than 10 years in the executive committee at Swift. So really long experience in the space.
And so one of the things that obviously entrepreneurs have to go through in the early phase of their life of the company, and actually even later, is fundraising. You know, how do you fund, you know, the team? How do you make sure that you have enough money to start building the product and then starting to commercialize it? Let's talk about fundraising. StashAway clients have co-invested with XA Network members in your latest round, the seed round. Can you tell us a bit more about who else have you raised money from, and what do you look for in an investor? How do you decide which investor to raise money from?
I mean, fundraising was probably the thing that I was the least familiar with, starting as an entrepreneur. Yes. I mean, running a business, building a business, I think we've been there before as well. We have some guesses, but raising money is a very new thing, complete new things. Thankfully, I never had to really ask for contacts or ask for money. I mean, it was always people coming to us saying, oh, we're interested, can we have a conversation? So that made, I think, things easier. So for that last round, the seed round, indeed, that's the round where the XA Network and StashAway participated in. So we have really investors that we're proud of. Investors like Jungle Ventures here in Singapore, investors like Rapid Ventures. So a payment fintech that invests in you is always a testimonial that we're solving a meaningful problem, I guess. And a Resolution Venture, 1982 Ventures. So really investors that focus on fintech and know the space well, and that's what we're looking for. So smart capital, not just money, but people who can help afterwards.
And so let me actually double down on that. Yeah. So obviously, you know, again, amazing feat actually raising money this year. I know it was a difficult year for everyone. So you had multiple parties interested in investing in iPiD. So you were in a great situation of being able to pick and choose investors. Why did you pick XA Network?
One is, it's really a network of angels. And to be honest, I love working with angels. We have several angels in the companies. They are probably the most useful investors, very genuinely wanting to help, a lot of empathy usually coming from angels as well. And I felt that through the XA Network. So when we had that meeting where we were pitching, but it was actually more than a pitch, it was a discussion with those founders, and almost half of the conversation was more about them asking how can we help you, which is really the kind of conversation you want to have. So smart capital and having people who genuinely want to help was definitely a plus.
Let's fast forward to today and look a little bit ahead. You've built the product, you've assembled the team, you raise money to be able to keep building. How will the next 3 to 6 months look like?
So we're definitely entering a very exciting phase, which is going live, having our first transactions and so forth. So what is next? What is next really in the coming weeks is that we will be live with our first partners. And when I say partners, I mean these institutions that are able to validate for us banking details in specific countries. And so through those partners, as I mentioned, we'll be able to validate around 1 billion bank accounts worldwide. So we'll go live with that side of the platform in the coming weeks. And then in Q1, so we already have our first customers who essentially have signed or expressed their commitments to go live as data consumers. And so that's for early Q1 of next year. So that's what's next, going live with both sides of the platform.
Amazing. Maybe one last question. Fast forward 5 years. What's your vision?
So coming back to what's the problem that we're solving? As I mentioned, we feel that 90% of the innovation is already there, and it's all about usage, essentially. And so those 4 services that I mentioned, so proxy addressing, paying to a mobile number, bank account validation, request to pay, QR payments. So what we want to enable is that these 4 services are available everywhere, domestically and cross-border. And so we want to be that platform that connects all those overlay services without moving money. So we partner with all the banks, the payment companies, because we don't move funds. So we provide that platform that interconnects those value-added services globally. And then we can do even more things on the back of that. Fast forward, we want to be that API call that any payment fintech or bank does before doing a transaction to get the data, validate the data, identify the most efficient route, and so forth. So we want to be that almost like a booking.com, if you wish, of cross-border transactions, where we offer all those services without moving money. Like booking.com doesn't operate hotels,
yes.
But I use booking.com every time I travel.
Makes sense. So it sounds like a very big vision, and to be honest, I'm obviously an angel investor through as a StashAway client and not independently. And now, the more I talk to you, the more I think that I wish I invested more. But it is what it is. I'm happy to be a small shareholder and hopefully to be part of a successful journey. Look, thank you so much for your time. This was a great conversation. Learned a lot about the company, and hopefully a few other people have also learned as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michele.
Next, I'll be talking to Kimin Yam, who is a member of XA Network and invested personally in iPiD. Kimin joined Netflix as its first in-house lawyers in Singapore when the platform launched in this region in 2016. Prior to Netflix, Kimin was a lawyer at Latham & Watkins, where he worked on first-of-kind transactions in the entertainment, gaming, internet, and media industries. Kimin has been a member of XA Network since 2021. So Kimin, thank you for your time.
Absolutely.
So first, you are a lawyer. You spend quite a bit of time at Netflix, a mature tech companies. How did you decide to become an angel investor?
Yeah, so the angel investing part of my life started before Netflix. So before Netflix, I was with a large international law firm, first in Los Angeles, and then I moved to Singapore about 10 years ago. And what happened was that I found myself working with clients who were institutional investors, right? PE funds, VCs, and also ultra high net worth individuals, right, as well. And by working with them, working on their deals, that's how I kind of got exposed to the startup ecosystem, venture capital. And I found it really, really interesting because a lot of times, especially for the early stage deals, it was an investment based on a little bit of diligence, but really a lot of conviction, right? And I found it really interesting to kind of talk to these founders, understand their product, and kind of see how they were trying to change the world, right? Trying to solve a problem. So that's kind of what was my first exposure. It took me a while before I started making my own investments separately, but I probably started that 15 plus years ago, maybe.
You then joined XA Network as a member a few years ago, and I imagine your pipeline of deal flow has increased tremendously. So how do you now think about selection? Which startups to invest in and which ones not invest in?
Yeah, so I think the basic criteria for, I can't say for all angel investors, but I think for many angel investors, right, are number one, like, do you understand the problem, and do you agree with the problem statement, right? Do you think, yes, this actually is a problem that's worth solving? Do you think that, the founders, right, the startup actually has the right, potentially a right solution for it, right? Do you believe in the problem and the solution that they're proposing, right? So conviction around that. I think the other thing is also conviction around the founders, right? Because you can have a very clear problem statement, a good attempt to try and solve it, but the founding team may not be right? They may not have the right experience, they may not have the right temperament, right? Because it's hard being a startup founder. And so the other thing with that is just like, okay, like, do I believe in the problem I'm trying to solve and the solution that they're proposing, and then do I believe in the founders? Those to me are probably the two biggest ones.
So there are now more than 120 people like you as members of XA Network. And so when you look at a company and discuss about it and think about it, you actually also hear perspective from some other people in this network. How does that influence your choices? How do you factor in inputs from some of the other members into your decision?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's a huge help, right? So I think for every angel investor who comes to an opportunity, you work with what data you personally have, right? Whatever experiences, knowledge you have. And for me, I'll be the first to admit that I don't know everything. I have not encountered every problem out there. And there's a lot that I don't know, right? I think the benefit of something like the XA Network is that it brings you together with other people with different backgrounds, different experiences, different companies, different industries. And then what happens a lot of times is that we'll get together after we've kind of reviewed the recording or done an interview with a founder, and we'll discuss the opportunity. What do we think about the problem statement? What do we think about the solution, the people? Who else do we know is in the space, right? What do we think the prospects are? And it's a really good, rich discussion, right? And sometimes it's validating, like people agree, like yeah, like like they agree with the way that you think about it. And sometimes it's challenging because actually I disagree, right? And I believe that this actually is a 10x, right, kind of thing, right? Like I think it's even bigger than they think it is. And so it's really interesting to get all these diverse perspectives from people. And I think to me, right, when I'm making a decision, that's a way to get more data, more perspectives around it. Ultimately, I'm still the decision maker, right? I need to decide like, okay, well, am I going to do it or not? But I think having all of this other high quality data, right, I would call it that, is really helpful, because this data comes from people who are angel investors themselves. They've been in tech, they've been in startups, they've been founders. They know what they're talking about, right? And so when you get together a group of peers like that, I think ultimately it does make my decisions better.
And that's that's good and similar to my experience, to be honest, in kind of being able to leverage some of the collective knowledge. And for instance, you having a legal background, I'm sure there is a number of discussions where people look at you and say, hey, there might be some legal complications in this journey. How do you think about it? Right. So let's apply your criteria of selection to your iPiD investment. How did iPiD score against this criteria, and what ultimately made the decision to invest?
Yeah. So iPiD is a really good one, because for me, I immediately identified with the problem that they are trying to solve. Because if you have ever tried to make a wire or money transfer across borders, and you have to deal with banking interfaces that were built in the 1990s, you just know how painful it can be, right? You have to put in the IBAN number and the account number, and then you have the validation. A lot of times, the bank will call me back and say, like, we just need to further confirm, right? It's so painful, right? And when Damien and GJ, the two of the founders, kind of presented the problem, I was like, yes, that is a problem. I agree. I've experienced that problem. And then he proposed their solution, right? It's like, imagine a world where like it's as easy as putting someone's phone number, and the iPiD system does all the lookup for you. It validates the account details, and you're done, right? You don't need to know the person's bank number to make a wire transfer. Their mobile number will do. Or conversely, it could be an email. It could be any kind of unique identifier tied to that person that exists in one of their financial institution systems that iPiD can call, can verify that yes, this is the person. They'll come back to you and say, hey, you're about to make a transfer to Michele, right? Do you want to proceed, right? And say yes. That was so much easier than asking, what's your bank and what's your correspondent address, and like 6 or 7 different fields, right? That just takes so much time and is so inefficient. So for me, I was like, I get the problem. I love the solution, and I thought the founders were great. They were people who have been in the industry. They were longtime Swift veterans. They put together a phenomenal team. So they know what they're talking about. They have the experience to solve it. And I really appreciated how they kind of talked to and presented, right, their strategy for going to market. Right? They're not going to try and conquer it all at once, but a little bit at a time. And so for me, I saw the problem. I love the solution, so I had conviction around that. I think it's going to be a great product when it launches. And I had great conviction on the founders as well. I was like, I'm willing to put my money and bet on these people, right? They have lots of experience. They know what they're talking about. They're very down to earth and grounded. They know what they need to do, right? And I was like, okay, good. I'm going to back them.
Fantastic. And so you problem you understand, solution that you like, and also you like the fact that it's in steps, a team that you think can actually get it done from a number of perspectives. I agree with that's also the way I thought about it. Now, maybe let me flip the topic for a second. So we heard from Damien earlier that he was lucky enough and good enough to be able to pick and choose his investors. And he decided to pick XA Network because he was looking for smart capital rather than just capital. And in particular, he thought that some of the members might actually be useful and help him in building the company. So have you helped iPiD in any way since the investment?
Yeah, so I think with Damien, I think number one, he's a great guy. I really love working with him. I think he's a first-time founder though, right? So he's never founded a company before, and he's extremely smart. He's done a lot of his diligence and his research. But I think the value that we were able to add as XA, and it's not just me, right? But it's the network as a whole, because we did tap other people in the network to help with certain specific things. But as a whole, we're able to bring strategic advice to him and to the company, right? And I'll give you a few examples. So one would just be, as he was trying to close out the seed round, right? So we made a commitment, right? StashAway came in as well. It was great, but it wasn't enough, right? They were looking to raise more, and so he was talking to different funds and different angels out there, and he would come to me and say, so what do you think about such and such fund, right? What's your reputation in the market? And we would talk about like how to negotiate and position things, and also to think not just about the seed round, but also, okay, well, what would this impact be on your Series A or your Series B, right? If you're going to give them these rights now, do they understand that these are going to go away when a larger investor comes in later, right? And so kind of helping him navigate that, right, based on the experience that I have, right, as a relatively seasoned and experienced angel investor and lawyer, I was able to say, okay, like these are the things that you want to think about. And he could have gone to any one of the top law firms in town and gotten that, but they would have charged him maybe half of our combined commitment and ticket, right, as XA and StashAway. So it was one way to give a lot of good strategic advice when he really needed it, right, like in the midst of that fundraising round. Even beyond that, though, operationally we've been able to make introductions, right? So they wanted introductions to a couple of fintechs who may be potential clients or data providers for them, and so we're able to help with those introductions just because of the network that we have. And then I've also been able to help them with some of their legal work as well, right? So I'm a lawyer by training. They needed help like drafting commercial contracts and figure out how to structure the relationships. And so that's where I was like, okay, well, these are skill sets that I have. I'm happy to do it. And so I came in and I kind of advised them, helped them put the contracts together, helped them think strategically, right, about what they were trying to achieve and how best to do it.
Thank you, Kimin. This has been great. Maybe one last question before I let you go. How do you think about angel investments as part of your portfolio? How do you have a target allocation to angel investing out of your 100% net worth?
I personally don't put in more than 5 to 10%, 10% tops, right? But it gets a bit hard because like when I hit that, I was like, I have to stop here, right?
Yeah.
I love these companies, but just in terms of the bigger picture, diversification, just sound financial thinking, right? I was like, I have to stop here, which can be quite hard. But I think for me, I do it for a couple of reasons. Number one is because I just love helping founders, right? I'm really excited when I find people who have a dream and they're chasing. I was like, yeah, that's great. Like, and when I can add some value, I'm like, I would love to be a part of that story. I love to get to know these people and get to work with them. So that's one. The other thing, honestly, is that because the payoff is higher, or potentially could be higher. The failure rate is much higher, but if you had one Uber in your portfolio, or if you were an early investor in Facebook or Google, your depending on how much you put in, but your return could be 1,000, right, or more, right? And so if that is a appropriate size of your portfolio, it can make a statistically significant difference to your overall wealth, right? that being said,
Yeah.
you know, you should never like completely pie in the sky, like, oh, it's all going to work out great. You know, let me put all my money in, right? I think it's very important to diversify. Just put in like some percentage that you can accept losing.
Yeah, and also, you know, I like the way you frame it. So, you know, 5 to 10% max,
Yeah.
very diversified,
Yeah.
and kind of swinging for the fences, meaning there
Yeah.
is you know, it's you need the outliers in your portfolios are the ones
Exactly.
that actually will make
Yeah.
difference. Fantastic. Look, thank you so much for your time. I was really enjoyed the conversation. I learned quite a few things, and I'm even more excited about the StashAway Angel program, given you know, the ability to invest with people like you. So thank you so much once again.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you, Michele, for having me.